Whenever you create any campaign which has gone crazy viral in the last few years or any Abby video, did you feel that moment that ye fatega,
Course,
this will.
of course. Yeah, every time. Otherwise, we don't even like get into writing.
Calm down before you stress up the groove. The energy a little different when the blessings accrue. Hey, who you talking to? Just know I ain't no regular fool. Could be anything in the world, but I can never be you because I stand tall like I'm on my tiptoes, baby. You think a little too.
Hey guys, this is Ayush and I'm back again with another video. Have you ever wondered कि ये क्रेड के वायरल एड कैंपेन्स किसने बनाए हैं? Have you ever wondered कि AIB के ये जितने भी वायरल sketches होते थे या फिर ऑन एयर विद AIB जो शो आया था, who was the brain, who was the writer behind them? If you need answers to these questions and how just viral ad campaigns are made, how content goes viral, the psychology behind content creation, ये सब बातें करी हैं with this very very special guest. He's one of the smartest, wittiest and the sharpest creative content mind that we have had on this podcast. His name is Devaya and he's one of the sweetest person I know and I've learned a lot from him. This episode is golden for any creative agency, for any freelancer, for any content creator, because everybody is going to learn a lot from it. There are a lot of tips for all the creative professionals as well. But we do dive deep into how these great campaigns were made, how all of these ad campaigns become viral. What is the conversation behind the scenes when they are actually formulating these ad campaigns? बहुत सारी इंटरेस्टिंग बातें हुई हैं, but in general you have to listen to this guy talk. He is such a sharp mind and more than that he is super funny. मतलब मुझे इतना मज़ा आ रहा था, 1 घंटा कैसे बीत गया पता ही नहीं चला. Do watch the entire episode and I hope you like it. Hi Devaya, welcome to the CNTC show. Thank you so much for joining in. How are you doing?
Thanks so much, man. Thanks so much for having me. I'm doing quite decent actually. I think I'm sure this is not live, so your users may not know. Today is like the day when the whole crypto meltdown happened, and good for a few people, bad for some, like Ayush, who I think will have to vacate his house in the next 3-4 days. He's lost a lot of money. So this podcast, I think, might be a little bit low on energy, but that's just his sorrow. I think I should. It seems like now to your viewers that I'm hosting the podcast and you're the guest.
Well, it's so sad. I mean, for people who know this, I bought Ether at 330, which is I think an all-time high in the in the recent times, and I'm like, oh my god. But ठीक है.
No, there's never a good time to enter. There's never a good time to exit. There's always a good time to lose all your money. So that's the spirit.
Were you always the funny one in the group?
I mean, I was I was always, I think, the energetic one with no filters. I was the one with no filter. So that always made it a little awkward. So yeah.
I would love to hear your introduction from your side. How did you reach where you are right now from, a lot of copywriting jobs, a lot of them, to now running this company?
I mean, like, full introduction is on my LinkedIn, and I've spent some time writing it, which Ayush later reminded me I haven't updated it because that was like a year and a half ago. But I mean, this is just, I think, Ayush outsourcing his job and making me introduce myself. But yeah, so what, like, basically I'm just like a writer, and now this word that is so hard to spell called entrepreneur, a startup guy, content creator, all the buzzwords that are fresh in the market and selling right now. I'm trying to be all of that. So that is, I think, my introduction. Crypto investor. Yeah. So that is my introduction.
Wow. एक तो I am so stunned. Devaya, you always undersell yourself. Just for the audience, Devaya has been worked in some of the biggest agencies in the world. He runs this company which is all things small, and they do a bunch of stuff. And please tell these people that you do all these things because it is super inspirational to somebody like me who's just put his foot in the creative industry. And I think we can touch each part of what you do separately. But the first thing that I want to talk about is the campaigns, the viral campaigns that you've produced. But before we touch on to that, how did this journey from being a copywriter to an entrepreneur, was this planned, or did it just happen, like, one after the other?
Nothing is, I mean, just contrary to everything that Bobby Deol and Ajnabi believe, nothing is ever planned. And I don't know how old your listeners or your viewers are. I don't even think they'll get that reference. but but yeah, so nothing is planned, dude. Like I'm just like I'm like Modi ji, like just Jola Utaya, or what is that thing that he keeps saying? Fakiro, like took the bag and just started walking. Same shit, man. Like just take bags and walk from one place to the other. But no, I mean, not really. There's no planning involved. It's a bunch of happy coincidences and quick decisions. Like I think the thrill of taking risks, like and I always go by this every time I have to make a big career decision, which is usually like once in 3 years or once in 4 years. Like every time I have to make like a big decision on where to move, what to do, and things like that. Just one thing, this is my only rule I have, is to never make a boring mistake. So even if it's a mistake, it has to be a spectacular new mistake. So that's the only filter I have. Like if I'm switching companies, if I'm switching streams, if I'm switching industries, if I'm switching jobs. So the only thing is, like, I don't want to make like a boring mistake. That's like the most dumbest thing like I could do. So yeah, just looking for new experiences and I keep moving. Yeah.
From like a traditional marketing agency to then moving to AIB, how was that shift? मतलब उस shift में ऐसा क्या difference क्या था, मतलब in operations, in daily operations, in your perspective?
The first was like it was a very high risk move, because I was like, I sort of spent 7 years in the advertising industry, and by the time like you're 7 years in and you've done like the rounds like in 2-3 good places, have like a decent enough name, is when you actually start encashing all your time that you put in. Because the first few years in advertising, I think even now, is pretty shitty in terms of the money you make and the hours you spend. And so it's, after that 7-8 years, when you get into somewhere that little between mid management and nearing like that upper management, is like where you encash on all the hard work that you put in, or like you can always encash hard work in life, but the all the money and all the resources that you put in, is, so it's that time. So I was at that crossroads, and but I was just like, I loved advertising for the first 5 years, and pretty much the last 2 years was like pretty, like I didn't like, it just became another job, which I think is a function of many things. I was in a great team. I was working with some fantastic people for the first 5 years, and then I switched a couple of jobs, and I didn't find a good rhythm, so to speak. And then I was bored, and this AIB thing happened. Like they were looking for writers, and when I heard of it, I was like through like a mutual friend. It's just like the same thing. I didn't want to make a boring mistake. I was like, yeah, this is a new industry, new job. Like, just everything is different. Going from this big MNC to like an apartment with just like 5-6 people. And the company, the roast had just come out. So a bunch of police cases also. And like, but working, like, I mean, I was never in the comedy scene. Never. Like, I don't even think I watched stand-up comedy in India so much. So just moving to a completely new industry I've never been a part of, into a completely new place, new environment, new industry. Everything was very appealing, like money-wise, it wasn't a great move at that time. So, but I just kept that aside for some more time, and just like I knew it would be an epic ride. However, way it would end, good way, bad way. Personally, I'm not saying for the company, but like say personally, like if it didn't work out in 6 months and I had to move, but I knew it would be a very interesting 6 months.
It's pretty interesting. And then now back to the advertising space.
So it seems, dude. Like I finished this, then we were at AIB. AIB, we did some people worked there for close to like 4 years. Great fun, amazing teams, amazing people, brightest bosses ever, best bosses, and most talented people in the country. Working with them, and then yeah, then actually this the company that I have right now with my partners is actually a non-fiction media company, and that is the kind of industry that we are looking to sort of like leave a mark in. Uh, but just like chances happen, and just did a few pieces of work in advertising, and that really took off. And now it's like the I won't say I'm back at it, but it's a part of what I do now. Yeah, yeah. It's not my full time it's not my full time gig. So it's if the work is interesting and people are interesting, I pick it up. Yeah.
I guess you're also doing a lot of admin related stuff now that you're running a company per se. You're I'm sure the role must have now extrapolated to not just writing or executing, but like also looking over everything that's going on.
Yeah. Well, thankfully, I have like really good co-founders who manage most of that. Like I mean, I I'm not I still not like something that I worry about. But obviously, there is like targets that we need to hit, money that we need to make so that the company runs. So there is that added. I wouldn't say of course anything is a burden, but there is that added dimension to the job, right? So that is pretty new for me because literally the work that you do is the money you see. Like it's just like as basic as that, right? Like in a big company, usually you are like working, and like even if there are the what do you say, like the pitfalls and the peaks, you don't see the money moving around you, right? Like, or you don't see like the impact right around you on the business because there are like 100 people above you and 1,000 people around you. But here it's very direct, right? This correlation is just too crazy. So yeah, that's an added dimension, and I quite enjoy that. Like because every day basically your skin is in the game. So that is a fascinating aspect of it. Yeah.
I actually want to tune this to a different tone. You have interacted with a bunch of clients, and I think your LinkedIn bio says this, that it's a journey of good, bad, and worse clients, something like this. I want to ask that when a client comes to the conference room and says, hey, Devaya, we want a viral campaign, how do you reply to that? Because and is there a thing like a viral campaign that you know for sure ki this thing will just blow up?
I mean, there is, of course, like, see, the way they ask is very, it's like, it's literally they're in a shop and asking for something, right? Like, it doesn't always work like that. But having said that, like, at AIB, if we learned something, is that we knew how to make things go viral, right? Like, it is definitely a science. There are tools, it's a science, and it's, you need to understand like ideas, you need to understand the internet, you need to understand the people on the internet very deeply. You need to know what, you need to understand, like when you're writing something, you need to know where is the moment that you need to stop and milk. So there are tools that, it's sort of the last half a decade that we've been working on perfecting and understanding. So, it's not like virality is not accident. At least, if you are in it for a long time, it's not an accident thing. You can go viral once. You can go like, you can't keep going viral every time. All right, and it's impossible to go viral every time, but it's at regular intervals. To do it is not chance. It's not always chance. So when clients say that, I mean, it also depends on how open the client is to ideas and to work, and how brave the client is when they say that. Most often times they're not. So they just say, I want something viral, but here is 10 lakh rupees only. Here is start this, this thing should be like this thing should be like that. At this point, this should happen. So all the terms and conditions that follow is what kind of like I won't see at the end of it, they also have a job. They also have
Yeah.
to show results, right? And what they are asking for is also backed by data, right? It's not arbitrary. It's not like if they're saying open with a packed shot, it is backed by data, because if your ad is going on YouTube, like you'll just skip it, right? Like in the first 5-6 seconds, if there is no pack shot, like you just skip it, and like you will never know what ad came on live, right? Like when you were watching. So they also come from like data points with their demands. So it's somewhere things have to like kind of align and meet, right, in terms of their expectations and your ability to create work. So when that doesn't happen, then there is no good campaign. So but when that happens, it always like is something special.
So what I get from this is, and I have a bunch of questions, but what I get from this is it's about training a muscle, and that's how you increase the chances of virality. It's also about the risk-taking ability of who's in front of you and understanding if they're able to sort of go beyond like a certain point. But you talked about tools, that you have these tools that you can sort of make use of. What are these tools, and can we sort of correlate this with your recent, and you were talking about leaving a mark. This campaign definitely left a mark, which is the Cred campaign. It's been going crazy viral everywhere, whether it's Twitter, digital, LinkedIn, Instagram. So what were these tools and how were they applied to, let's say, this campaign?
So I mean, it's the tools thing is definitely something I can't explain in like an hour or 2 hours. I mean, there's no tools as such. Like I think maybe I used the wrong word. I mean, yeah, there are tools, but it's not so scientific. Like, right? It's these things that you train your muscle. Like I think the word that you used is very accurate. Training your muscle, right? Now let's see people who tweet. Okay. Now sometimes like everyone has that one funny tweet that can catch fire and go viral, all right, but then you look at some people, they can do that on a regular basis, right? And it's as basic as that, right? Like that's training your muscle, like, and I can feel it also, right? Like say sometimes like say I go off social media and for a while I'm busy, whatever, like and like then I decide like, hey, no, I need to be active on social media. That's like good PR for me. And then I come back and I try to start writing or tweeting or something. It's very difficult. It's not easy. I mean, but the more you do it, it's a muscle that you train yourself to compress your thoughts in limited characters in the most interesting manner, right? So, and when you're doing it often, you kind of know, right? Like, hey, let me do it like this. This is a format that I use. I can get more RTs. So there are these, things that we always use in terms of formats. In terms, it's like we study writing, we study like designing a joke. We kind of also like audience understanding what they like in terms of like, is it relatable? Is it like saying the truth? Is it polarizing? This content, is it polarizing? So there are like these many things that we look at, and if one piece of content kind of fits into 2-3 of these things, then we immediately know that okay, this has a lot of potential. So I mean, that's as easy and concise as I can be while trying to explain this. And yeah, I mean, with respect to the recent campaigns, I think what works is always is the element of like surprise, right? And it's contrasting. If you look at it, it's very contrasting thoughts, right? In any campaign that we use, like maybe like say like the auditions campaign last year for Cred, or this year's campaign, I feel it's just one of the things that is and that and being very truthful, right? Like so I think these are the 2-3 things, like, and also nostalgia is such a big aspect of virality. So I think these are 2-3 things that, like, roughly, if you look at it, kind of covers it. So yeah, I mean, this is like something that we kind of keep in mind while working on things.
I'm gonna correlate this with a really bad analogy because that's the only thing that I can think of right now because of the crypto crash. When Elon Musk at 1 a.m. gets crazy mad and thinks, now I want the Bitcoin price to be up, he tweets something and he says something like Tesla buys 1.5 billion, something like this, right? In that room when he's tweeting this, he knows that this is going to create a bump in the market. When you and the writers were sitting in a room and curating this campaign, or whenever you create any campaign which has gone crazy viral in the last few years, or any Abby video, did you feel that moment that ye fatega,
course.
this will...
Of course. Yeah, every time. Otherwise, we don't even like get into writing. Like, because see, writing, I mean, see, ad films is still less work because you're just playing 20-30 seconds. The idea is everything. Um, uh, but like, say, like the sketches that we used to do, we would, I mean, obviously have a good feeling because we think of, like, say, plenty of ideas, and then we pick one idea to kind of develop, which that idea that we develop it's a month-long journey in the best case scenario, sometimes maybe even 2 months. So you have to pick the best one, because you pick the wrong one, it's like, say, 3 writers time going into the wrong idea being developed for a month, and then you realize that, okay, this is not working, right? So most of the time, like, we kind of at least, I mean, it may not always be the result, like, we put out something and it may not work, but if you're working on something and we, like, initially we get that feeling, we know that all of us in the room know that this is going to really pop, and then it's also up to the writing, it's also up to, like, a bunch of other factors that come in, like execution and all that, but it's something that we know. Yeah.
Okay, the question that I'm going to ask may sound very silly, but when you're in a room with, let's say, somebody who's a marketing manager of Cred or Kunal, and you tell them ki, hey Kunal, we're gonna do a campaign in which Rahul Dravid will be breaking windows, side mirrors of other cars. Now this sounds like a bizarre idea on paper. Like, this is a kind of idea you'll be like, Arey, what are you doing? I'm not gonna spend crores and crores on something like this. How do you convince a client to then, go forward with ideas like this?
I mean, it depends on client to client and everything, and like, clients come in. I mean, this is like people are like different. Each of them are their own case studies, but like I said, it just depends on bravery, right? Like, campaign like Cred, for example, like, just, I mean, just blind faith, trust, and belief, and being brave. Like, it's like, it's honestly just, it's the client's campaign. Like, we can take as much credit as we want for it, but it as like the creative team, but it's the client's campaign, because this is brave, bold decisions that one takes, and just backs people and their ideas, and to make it work. But like, say, if it's other clients, you kind of try and make them see, like, if there's an idea I completely believe in, and I think that this will really do well and this really works, and there is no immediate buy-in, like, you hope to kind of break it down to them, like, logically speaking, like, rationally, just rationally break down the idea and say why it could work, and, like, just break it down, saying, see, it's got this factor, it's got this factor, it's got this going for it, and then you kind of put it together, it can really create, like, magic. And most of the times I think it's a no, because they've already made up their minds, right? So it just becomes very hard to kind of make them see it. But also, most of the times it's also a question that you have to ask yourself, right? Like, are you seeing it wrong? Right? Like, not every time a client says this idea doesn't work for me, is that the client doesn't get it or the client's not being brave. It could also be that your idea is shitty and you have lost objectivity because you're the one kind of coming up with it, right? So, so there has to be that, what do you say? You got to keep your ego aside. And sometimes, after a week, I feel like, hey man, yeah, the client was right. Like it would never work. It would have never worked. And yeah, I mean, you just hope that. See, the thing is, there's no data. All right, that's the best part about this industry, right? There is no, like, I can't take an idea, run it through some simulation, and then get a result saying that if this is going to work or not. It's not going to work, right? It can also be that sometimes you think of the idea and then idea is damn good on paper, but the execution is a complete botch up, right? And sometimes you think the idea is like okay, and then the execution just takes it to some other level, right? So so there are a lot of variables at play while the only thing is there are so many variables at play about something so abstract, right? About an idea. There is no certainty here. And also there is someone putting a lot of money behind it because it is not cheap, right? It's not like, okay, let's just run like a quick, let's just put like $20,000, put it out and see if it works, and then we can course correct. In most of the cases, you cannot course correct, right? Like once you created something and you put it out there, if it's shit, it's shit. You can't like quickly make any changes to it. So obviously people have to overthink this, right? Like, and also the person commissioning the idea also is worried about their jobs, right? Like if like they commission the wrong idea and it completely backfires and it doesn't do well at all. Like if you commission something crazy and it tanks or it doesn't come out well, because like I told you, there are like 100 variables between the idea and the execution. And then if it comes out poor, like the person who commissioned it, who said, okay, I'm going to put money behind this, will really look like a fool, right? And that is going to really adversely impact their career. As opposed to, like, say the writer or like the agency behind it, like we have many clients, right? Like I can just like quickly hide this and just go and do. I mean, obviously you can't keep doing it all the time, but you can like work your way around bad campaigns, shrugging it off and hoping something else kills. But for the client putting in the money, that's the only campaign they're putting their money into.
Right.
So they have a lot to lose, right? They have a lot more. They have a lot more to lose than say like me on a campaign. So in terms of money, in terms of reputation, in terms of job. So I have to like like if a client's being tough, like they're not being like tough because they're douches, right? They're being tough because their job is literally on the line.
Yeah.
And their reputation is literally on the line within the organization. So I get why they would want to play it really safe. They would be like, okay, even in case the whole idea tanks, like in the first 3 seconds, we can see the product. And it's at least simple, like, if someone looks at it, they'll just understand what's happening and the product window is there, so that it just gets taken care of. And I can always say that, hey, this is in line with what we've been doing in the past. So I will not get singled out if this does poorly, right? And that is something any normal person would do on a regular basis, right? You will not take risks on, like, tell me something. Would you like pay $40,000 for like a shirt that is completely like whacked out in color print and where like it almost looks like a Joker's costume? All right, like, can you wear that to a wedding? All right, like, but a Ranveer Singh can still pull it off, right?
Yeah.
Some people can pull off anything, right? But normal people can't. So we are all, programmed to follow where we all conform at all points in our lives, right? So the client is just doing that. The client is conforming because why would the client want to take a risk losing their job, right? So,
Right.
so I mean, I definitely keep that in mind too. So I know at the end of the day, if a client is being a total douche, that's not them as a person. That is them at their job. So I think the problem I feel with most like creative people is that they mistake one for the other when there's a client and you're always like, Arey, that person's an idiot, right? Like that person may not be an idiot. The person in a personal capacity could be way smarter than you are, right? You might be like this creative guy who can write and all that, but they might have way more knowledge, nuance, understanding, and taste compared to you. So there is the person and there is the professional. So professionally they might be conformists, but personally they might be risk takers. So I mean, you have to do these things. You have to read the client properly, and then kind of decide how you push your ideas, which you think is good for the brand.
So we were talking about how virality or just making good content, it's also a muscle that we just train again and again and again. And you've been in this space for the longest time now. Let's say you in 2010 to now in 2021, how has this content evolved in digital, in now OTT? But like the general, if you put content, which is a very general term again, but if you put content as a whole, how has it evolved in the last 10 years?
This has been insane. Like it changes, I think every year almost, right? Like we are in 2021, right? Like say 2017 or say 2018, uh, we were all on Facebook. And now, how many of us open Facebook, say in a week, right? Like uh, the company, just can you believe this? The brand that set this whole thing in motion, all right, was Facebook.com, and that didn't last 10 years, right? Like the whole, like when it come in, like I think I started using Facebook in 2008. So I mean, they pretty much died, at least in our circle, in I mean 2017, 18, right? And there are some digital people who got on the web who completely miss Facebook, right? Like this, like the current 20-year-old might have, or the current say 17, 18-year-old might have completely missed the Facebook wave, right? And it's kind of crazy that this company is not even 10 years old or 12 years old, and that the brand is irrelevant right now. I mean, it's not irrelevant because there are still millions of people on it, but you get what I'm saying right now, right? Like at least in our circle of, nobody comes to me and says, "Hey, I want a Facebook campaign anymore." Right? Like that never happens. It's like Instagram influencers, Instagram, YouTube, Moj, Takatak. It's there, right? Like it's not even like Facebook. So that is how fast the internet changes, and a lot of things. Like for example, in terms of YouTube, like people followed, you know, collectives before, like AIB, TVA, Filter Copy, like everything was like BuzzFeed. Like it's just like people followed these brands, but now people follow people, right? Like you follow Tanmay Bhatt, you follow Prajakta Kol, you follow a Beer Biceps, you follow, you follow people, right? You follow Ashish Chanchlani, you follow who else? Triggered Insan, you follow Fukra Insan. You don't follow what do you say? You don't follow so many like collectives anymore, or you don't follow like groups anymore. So that is like the biggest change, right? And even on YouTube, the creator that puts out their most personal, authentic self is what the audience really likes, and they subscribe to that. Like vlogs, for example, or reactions. Like it's not so scripted anymore, but like before it was all scripted, right? Like you had to make a sketch, you had to, like, there's some amount of finesse in it. It's still like closer to cinema, closer to, like motion pictures that we are used to in
Right.
terms of grammar. But right now it's just camera on, like what Tanmay does, right? Like that is like the trend, like, what, like, say, your gamers do, like Mythpad and those kind of things, right? That's the trend, right? Like you just be your complete, real, authentic self is what people subscribe to. So that's like another big user behavior change in the last few years, and that's also a reason of it's a function of loneliness, if you ask me, right? Because a lot more people are more consumed on their phone, and you can't blame them, because like, man, the internet is so much more interesting than any person, right? Like it's so hard for anybody to compete with the internet. So if you are probably in front of me, like, I just like want to go on to the internet, because you can never be as entertaining to me as as internet can be, right? You
Ouch.
can't provide me the kind of you can't provide me the kind of variety and the kind of dopamine hit an internet scrolling on the internet gives me, right? Like I have to put up with awkward silences, I have to put up with like searching for conversations to talk about, right? So what has happened is we've all become lonelier now, because we don't make connections anymore, right? Because most of the times we're on our phones. So the sub like what do you say, one of the takeaways from that is your personal relationships suffer, your personal connections are not deeper anymore. So what happens is you're looking for that also on the internet. Like you want to see someone's life, but you just want to see a edited highlight version of it in a vlog, right? And but somewhere you want to see the reality of it. You don't want to go see like a scripted joke, you don't want to see a sketch, because you still have to use your mind there. But here it's like you want to see things that are real on the screen, because for all the reality that you're missing in real life, right? So that's why people are following people now. So even with like other platforms like a Moj, or when TikTok existed, you followed like you followed influencers, you followed dancers, you now followed groups as such. So I think that is like at least how YouTube has evolved. That is also how Instagram has evolved. Like you want creators sharing their most personal details, you want to see their lives unfold. So that is, I think, where the internet's come to so far, and that also has kind of shaped the kind of content that the internet creates, because the content that's being consumed by the consumer is the consumer's needs have changed.
You
Yeah.
talked about a couple of things on YouTube, particularly that people want to see more of real life, an edited reel of a real life, which is different than real life, because then
Yeah.
you know 80 to 90% you just see the happy moments. You still see
Yeah.
the sad ones, but
But even that you see as drama, as
yeah,
part of drama, right? Like as part of like entertainment. You don't like it's just a show, right? Like
it's a show.
so that's how it is. Yeah.
I was actually intrigued by one more thing, and we were working on this brand campaign, and we were I remember telling you about this Instagram filter, right? So we were just showing them some numbers, and one of the numbers was huge, 67.5 million impressions on one of our filters, and we just sat down to sort of break down what led to like, and these are all organic impressions, what led to this. And that filter was actually a beautification filter. And what we realized was that at the core of it, loneliness is a driver, but insecurity is a bigger driver on at least Instagram. That people are still extremely insecure, and that's why there are insane amounts of impressions on something like this, which helps you remove your blemishes and makes it like perfect clear skin. And when you see that, especially a person like me, I just turned 23, and I think I did go through a couple of phases in my life, and I was just looking at somebody's life, and I was like, yeah, like living such a perfect life. Even though I know that it's not like I know that it's edited. I know that it's just curated moments. Does this happen to you? Because I think there is a slight generation change from yours to mine. But does this happen to you as well, that you feel like, shit, they're having the best time of their life?
I've seen it happen to my friends. It obviously does happen to me, but that's one, I think, good thing about like being in this business, right? Like I've seen this like for a few years now, and most of the times I also know like the influencers that probably and are a reason for people's envy. I know actually what is happening. Like, I understand their lives also, right? So I know like what is real, what is not. I mean, like, so that kind of softens the blow for me. But obviously, I feel so much FOMO in terms of putting work out, right? Like, I see like you see another writer, you see another content creator, you see another director, you see another entrepreneur putting like their pieces of work out, their news pieces out.
Yeah.
You obviously feel that like, hey, where's my validation, right? Like you the need for valid for me especially, the need for validation is way higher than feeling FOMO for other things, right? Like if someone's like holidaying, partying, like living a great life, that doesn't like rock the boat for me, right? Like there's someone's constantly putting out like great pieces of work, and being their work is being talked about, that definitely will like I won't say like I'll be like, oh shit, like I'll be like completely upset or sad about it, but it will definitely play at the back of my mind, right? And also like when I'm putting things out, I want to put things out every now and then that people like, that people will be like, hey, this is a good piece of work. So my offline decisions are definitely driven by my online need for validation. So it comes more from within. So I think my FOMO levels or my FOMO filters are different to somebody else's FOMO filters. I think all our FOMO filters are also very unique, right? Like, um, if like you're a podcaster, I'm sure you're looking at other podcasters, the guests they're getting on their podcasts, all right? And then you look at your podcast, the best you can do is me, and then I'm sure you feel bad about it. That fucking that person's podcast, someone cool came, look at me fucking sitting with this fucker and talking shit, right? Like, so everyone's FOMO filters are different, and I think with age also is different. Like, I'm sure your FOMO filters are like your friends partying, or your friends vacationing, or your friends dating, or you assuming that your friends have found connections. So I feel that is like maybe a generational shift. Like, I don't like, dude, I'm 34. Like, I mean, like, someone holidaying is definitely not going to make me feel very upset. Someone having a great time partying every weekend is not going to make me very upset as much as it would when I was in my early 20s, right? Like, if you want your, I mean, back then it was Facebook, you wanted like to be tagged in good pictures, you wanted to be tagged in happening places, right? So everyone's FOMO filter is different, and
Right.
of course even I feel it, but my filters are different.
The core of it is validation, but what I feel is yours is more professionally driven now, where you would want.
Yeah, because my business and my professional area is social media and the internet, right? Like creating for the internet. So it's the line is a little blurry over there for me.
So between 0 to I'll hike the mountain for an Instagram picture to where are you on this graph from 0 to 10?
I think I am very close to like the base camp of the mountain, right? Like sometimes I sit and think about it, saying that if would I like be so driven and willing to work so hard if nobody in this world got to know what I'm doing, right? And like if they didn't know that, like if I'm doing some cool piece of work and like now with social media you share it, right? And all your friends see that piece of work, all the people, all your social contacts see that piece of work, and they validate you saying that wow, it's a good piece of work, not just on social media, even outside, right? When like you meet them and they're like, hey, this like the like when friends meet, or they already know what I'm doing, right? Like, so sometimes when I think about it, like would my whole approach to life and my profession be different if social media didn't exist? The answer is sadly a yes, right? Like I do make my professional choices, and my drive and my willingness to work hard is just obviously for the money, but like also for the validation. So I am quite high in that scale of I will do it for the gram.
For the
Right?
gram.
Like I do it for the gram. So yeah.
I actually want to dial back and ask you a very primary question. What is your core why? Why are you doing this? And once we do this, I also want to talk about 52 and 47 and Borderlands and all those other things. But before that, what's your why?
For me it's permanence, like somewhere, right? Like I think it's for everyone, but I've not lived everyone's life, so I can't answer this so confidently. But I think for my life I can say it's like permanence, right? Like you just want to be, like you just want to outlive yourself, right? And like the only way that you can outlive yourself is through your work, at least in my line of work. And maybe that is the reason why I chose this line of work, right? Like you write something or you create something, and it's always going to be there. Nobody can take that away from you, right? And it will be there after I'm gone. Um, but when I think about it at a more deeper level, it will stop mattering after I'm gone. All right, to people. So then it just becomes like, hey, let me not think so much. Let me just distract myself and do some work. So I think the why is definitely like permanence and short-term validation, like to make you forget the like the why, right? So to distract yourself enough. I think Tanmay keeps saying this so well that it's you just need to keep creating games for yourself, right? Otherwise, you will one day be like, if there's no game, nothing, then you start thinking about like deeper questions, and you realize you don't matter, right? And then that is like another rabbit hole. So yeah, so I think like somewhere I feel my why is permanence.
A couple of questions. Firstly, a fear that I have. I fear, just you quoted Tanmay, right? And I've heard him say this a lot. The fear is that I feel if I start thinking too much, I'll become content with what I have, and then I'll quickly become complacent. And then I'll stop hustling the way I am. And then what?
I think it's a personality thing, right? Like like for most people, like the reason, like if they start thinking too much, they'll start feeling sad, right? Like they'll start feeling like, shit, I've not done anything. Like, what am I doing with my life? Like, look at that person. Like, what is happening? You feel that you will get complacent if you start thinking like a why.
I also feel that I envy people who are ignorant sometimes. A person who is ignorant, who doesn't know. Like if I tell you that the chances of you getting struck by lightning are more than, something which you thought you would die of, like you'll suddenly feel very anxious. And you're like, arey, shit, now I'll have to take care of this as well. And especially something which is not in your control. So, but somebody who's ignorant is just walking on the street and is like, life is great. So,
Yeah, that's why they say, no, ignorance is bliss.
yeah. I think, does this thought ever come to you that what if like I start thinking too much and then okay, now the meaning is gone?
It also depends on personality and the type of person you are, right? Like I am restless, right? Like if I will find something to do, right? Like I cannot, what do you say? I cannot not work. Like, it's part of who I am. It's like I'm a workaholic. So like, so I will find something to put my mind into. Like, I remember this one time in 2015, beginning of 2015, like, when I say my advertising career, like I wasn't feeling it and all that. And so this is normal, right? Like, then what are you doing in life? Like, what do you want to do? Like, if this career is not, like, you're not feeling it, like, why do you want to slog another few years in a career you're not feeling? So I stopped. I mean, I don't think about those things. I'm like, okay, this is not working right now. Like, let's figure something out. I started working on my body, right? Like, I'm like, okay, I have my body right now, and I was like over 100 kilos. And right now also I'm close to somewhere over there. But at that time I was like, okay, like, let me just start working on my body. Like, let me see what happens if I have breakfast every morning at this time. Let me see what happens if I kind of cut out, like, soft drinks from my life completely. Let me see what happens if I cut out sugar from my life. Let me see what happens if I cut out, like, carbs from my life. Let me see what happens if I do all this and run every day. Let me see what happens if I can run faster than what I did yesterday. So, like, I just go into that rabbit hole, and that almost for a few months became my full-time obsession. Right? I didn't give a fuck about work. All right, work was on autopilot. I was like, okay, fine, fuck it, just write something, send it. But like, my obsession became, like, I started working on, like, this other thing, project of mine. So I think it just naturally comes to me to find something to keep myself occupied. Like, I don't think I'll ever run out of things to keep myself occupied. So I'm not so much I don't think so much into the future about where I will be, what is going to happen, what is, like, where will I end up like 20 years from now, how much money I will have, um, what will my like, you know what is the work I leave behind. So somewhere I mean, I know I said permanence, but like, I I have a little bit, I think that's also where your self-confidence comes in, no? Like, you will be like, okay, you will work it out somewhere. So like, this is I just tell myself that I don't know, it might be false self-confidence. Like, it's gonna happen, something's gonna happen, but like, right now, what needs to be done. So so that's how I avoid thinking about deeper things.
And so, money per se, if you get a lot of it, you suddenly in the society, there's a negative connotation attached to richness. Uh, we've seen these movies that all the evil people are sitting in this big corporate office in the tallest building. Now, is having money the core thought behind your why? Is that bad?
Not at all. Like, I think I used to also, like, when I would make plans for my future, or when I would plan, like, what I wanted to do, until like a few years ago, I would not even consider money, right? Like, but now I feel money is like one of the most important and essential things, right? Like, I'm like, fuck artistry. Like, yeah, there is this whole struggling artist romance that has been propagated so far, but people think money can corrupt, like, I don't know what, like, people think money can corrupt your talent, or money can corrupt your craft, right? Like,
Right.
for me, I've realized that it can only make it better, because if I have enough money, I don't have to do shit work, right? I don't have to, like, fucking just work on some client that I don't like. I won't be forced to write something I don't want to do, right? Like, if I have money, I can do genuinely what I want to, right? Like, that's like such a privilege. So so I want to be rich. I want to get rich. I want to, like, so I work. So in the last few years, I've worked a lot on my wealth. I work a lot on my finances. Like, I've realized that, being good at your job and being good at wealth are two different things. Like, I can be extraordinarily good at my job, but I'm not, like, at my craft. I might be improving there, but I had, like, completely not focused about this other aspect of my life, which is money. till like a couple of years ago, and I did not like take saving so seriously. I didn't take saving and making my wealth grow so seriously, right? So now I work very hard at it. Like, I spend a few hours reading about money. I spend a few hours reading about wealth. I mean, I spend a few hours reading about mutual funds. You know, like crypto, like startups, and like investing, and like returns, and um, reading a lot of reading a lot of material on the internet on wealth creation, wealth generation. So and how to get like maximize your wealth.
Potential.
I spend a lot of time on that, and then I kind of implement it also at some level, and that occupies a lot of my mind now on how to like multiply my like whatever little amount of money I have to ensure I mean, like what does money give you at the end of it? Like, it just gives you the freedom to pick and choose what you want to do, right? So to ensure I get to that place faster. So wealth is the most important thing that I don't know why it has got like a very bad name. Like, people look down on wealthy people. People feel that like I like wealth is like is perhaps I've realized the most important thing. It can sort a lot of things out for you. I'm not saying it's the answer to life. Right? Like I'm not going to try finding meaning in the wealth I hope to make or hope to create, which people do. And I think that is where it becomes like, I mean, whatever works for people. But I feel like, I have friends who are like, okay, I'm going to get rich. Like, having a big car and having this massive house, having this fucking branded, clothing is going to make me feel better. Like, I'm going to find me. So when I feel that's my personal feeling is that when you try and you try and start to find meaning in wealth or associate your identity to wealth, I think that becomes a little bit of a problem. But like, I'm very clear why I want to be very wealthy, because I can do what I want to do. I can lead a comfortable life. Like, why would anyone want to struggle, man? Like, seriously, like, why would you want to be good at your job, want to do good work, and then struggle financially? Like, it just doesn't make any sense.
Struggle is romanticized,
Yeah, completely.
When I first came to Bombay, I was like, where's the struggle? Like, I did not
Yeah.
struggle because I was in my college bubble and I was protected by my college internship, my parents. But I was like, oh, okay, maybe this is it. And then my struggle came in very different forms. And I think everybody's struggles come in different form. But coming back to artists being like, a lot of artists are not careful about like money. And this is something which I've seen really, really common even artists my age. The thing is, the biggest discrepancy that I see in the creative industry is that the same campaign could be priced at 25 lakhs and the same campaign could be priced at 2 crores. How is this pricing of creative work takes place, and like what is the logic behind it? How do you convince a brand, or is it just perception?
Yeah, it's a full gray area. It's as crazy as pricing a piece of clothing, right? Like in a showroom you pay more, but the same piece of clothing outside you pay way lesser, right? You're paying essentially for like the brand, and that's also with creative people and their work. You're just paying for, you think that this person is good. How I kind of look at it in terms of, see, if you compare, no, you're bound to get fucked in your head. Like if you compare, like like, hey, I'm getting so much, this person is getting that much, and now, like that kind of screws you over. But like what I do is I put a worth to myself. I'm like, okay, this is what I should be getting every month. All right, this is my this is what my time is worth, and then I kind of break that down into smaller units. So this is what my hour is worth. So that is how I price, and like at least that's, I can tell you from my experience, that's how I kind of charge or quote. Now I don't give a shit if Ayush is 2xing me or Ayush is going to do it at half my price. But I am very sure I will not like budge from this price because this is what I think is my worth is in the market, or this is what more than I think this is what I should be making this year every month. This is what I should be taking home. So so you automatically decrease the number of variables in your thinking. So the problem happens is like you're like, hey, I'm worth so much, but he's worth so much, but she's doing it in like a lesser price. So I think when you put all that together, it gets a little confusing. So so yeah, that's how I generally. I mean, I think most people should look at what works for them and then take it from there.
But isn't this pivoted a lot to your life situation to put things into perspective? Like, for example, let's say you have made a not so good financial decision and you've bought a 10 CR house. Now you have to fulfill the EMI, right? Like you can't just not fulfill it. So suddenly the bar has gone to you making at least 25 lakhs a month, for example. Now, but then, okay, and you have also convinced yourself. But how do you put across that convincing, like your internal convincing? How do you make it extrinsic and how do you convince the client?
No, I feel that is not the client's problem if you made a bad, if you priced yourself wrong in the market. So that is essentially like a mismatch in your expectation of yourself, your self-worth. You think you're like way higher than essentially, not self-worth, I think is a wrong word, your financial worth, your expectation and your bad financial decision. So can't be like encashed from a client, right?
Right.
So I think it's unfair to like ask more money because you made a bad decision, right? Like, and it's survival of the fittest. And then the client will be like, no, this is bullshit. Like I'll get someone else at 1/5 of what you're asking, and they're going to do the same job. So then obviously it makes more sense to go with that person.
But now comes a follow-up question is how do you bridge this gap? And when you said I can find somebody for 1/5 the job, this is what I've seen a lot, that most of the times when you increase the cost 5 folds, after a point of time, the returns are extremely, the returns do not appreciate linearly. It like on the graph, it just like settles after a point of time. But still, like there's huge amount of discrepancy in the money that people are making. So firstly, how do you bridge the gap of what you think you should be getting and what you should actually be getting? And then even in that area, how do you like keep increasing your price? Because there are artists who would charge obnoxious amount of money if you just see, he's just giving me an hour of his time or an hour of her time. So what is this gap bridging?
I just think it's a very difficult question to answer because like everything is arbitrary here too. Like everything is arbitrary, right? Like, and it's about someone, like if someone like this is like common sense, right? If someone is giving you the same quality of work at a much lower price, you will take it. So sometimes you are the beneficiary of that, and sometimes you are losing out because of that. All right. So when you are benefiting from that, you feel happy, and then you do more work, and then you feel that, okay, I've done good work, now let me just price myself a little bit more. And then the client is also like, okay, he's still not reaching that level where this other person is asking, or basically it's about, can you replace me? Like, so you just keep putting a price till you get replaced. The minute you hit a price and then like you realize you get replaced, you either bring your price down or you realize that's it. That's what the market can pay. Like this market can't pay more than that. It's not a problem with your ability or the client's willingness to pay. It's like what the market's upper limit is. So if you go above that, nobody is going to pay you because it's demand and supply there.
This is actually pretty interesting because yesterday I let go of a client because of the same disagreement, and then I don't know how to answer the question of I can find somebody who can do it for cheaper, which is a really, really popular question. Like, how do you say no now? Because you can't just keep working at the same rate. You have to increase your rate if you think the value that you're giving is more than, the general rate which is there. For example, the general rate for X is 10,000, but you know that you do work which is better than that, but this client doesn't probably want the work which is better than that, but then you are giving the same amount of time in units. So in that case, do you convince the client to increase the price? Do you work at the same rate, or do you leave the client?
It's to convince the client to give you a better price. If not, then if the price that if you think you are underpriced, you find another client who's going to pay you that much. If both is a no, then you just do it at that price, because that is the price of the market. Because then you are very sure, like if you say no and you move and you can't get another bigger price, then someone else is going to come and take this away from you, and you will be left with nothing at the end of it. So, so I think, these decisions can go either way. Like sometimes I feel like, I just say no to clients, like I just say downright no to clients. I'm like, this is not worth my time, right? And I know, like, and if I'm saying a no, I know for a fact, I'm very sure I can get more than what is being offered outside of this table. So, and if you're so sure, I think you should just walk away from it, because otherwise you are losing money, because you could be doing the same thing for a higher price elsewhere, but you're doing it for a cheaper price here. I think it's an equilibrium that kind of balances itself out. It's just that, with this business, there's also the variable of you not getting the result, right? Like there is that also, because nobody knows what the results are going to be, right? It's not programming, right? You just like hit enter and like the program works, right? Like then there's just right or wrong, but the added, probability that it is right, wrong, you can still debate after the work has come out if this work has worked or not worked. So there's just too many variables in this equation. So so I feel you should always have a minimum price below which you will not go, right? Like, and then just keep trying to score work that is a little higher than that minimum price every time. And if you're getting a lot of work at this one particular price, you just raise the minimum price. So yeah, and that's how I kind of do it. And
Now, I see that you're producing podcasts, ad campaigns, Borderlands, which is a documentary. A bunch of things are happening. Is this an exploration phase, or are these all the things that you want to do, and you will continue to be like a person who has his hands on like a bunch of things?
definitely not an exploration phase, because our investors will be very pissed if we are exploring, we are figuring this thing out. No, it's not an exploration phase. It's a I just realized that at the end of it, you need to build IP for yourself. You need to build wealth for yourself. It's not going to happen with just freelancing and hustling gigs, right? Like just writing this one campaign, moving on, writing another campaign, moving on. Like, you need to do other things. Like, I feel like producing is something that allows me to do that. Like, I can work on 3-4 projects at the same time, as opposed to writing. It's a finite number of hours that you can write. You can't write like 3 shows at the same time. I mean, even if you do, it'll be 3 shitty shows. So this is something that I want to do for the next few years. I will obviously still write and make stuff when I want to, but I want to spend majority of my time making things happen, where I'm putting people together and like kind of figuring those things out. And that's what I enjoy about producing, and leading it from that aspect more than just sitting in the room and writing, because I feel I'm not in that phase where I want to be doing that. So, and I kind of enjoy doing this as well, because I like working in teams, putting people together, like, seeing magic happen. Like, I like enabling those things. So that is something that I'm very interested in, and I want to build as a skill set in the next few years.
All of these, the way you answered this question was it. The thing which it sparked in my head was that this is not artist mentality. This is entrepreneurial mentality, and putting people together, putting teams together, producing, working on different projects. What is the difference between these two mentalities in your head, and uh, like how was the shift from an artist to an entrepreneur?
Uh, I I don't see too much of a difference because at the end of it, I'm still creating something. Like I'm enabling like creation. I might not be like at the like creatively at the forefront of it, but I'm still bringing this to life. And there is a like certain amount of direction also that like I won't say direction in terms of like filmmaking direction, but like um, it's something like I think this is going to work, and let me like put people together to make this work, right? Like, or the company thinks this is going to work, and the company is like, let's put this thing together to make it work. So I don't see like me being non-creative or me being not artistic. But I get your question, like where I'm not so close to, I'm not only consumed by the creative process. I'm consumed by the financial process. I'm consumed by like the logistics of it. I'm consumed by a bunch of other things that don't have to do with just creative work, right? So the mentality for me is like I said, it's a skill set that still interests me. I'm still closer to the field, and I know it's I think like being like player and coach, right? Like you're like player and manager. It's that, right? Like you're player, now I'm like basically manager. So and you're right, like most artists or writers or creators may not think like this because I mean priorities are different, right? Um, like my priorities are different. I'm 34, like, and I know the content landscape changes at a rapid pace, and is a very quick, very. I mean, it's not a good chance. It's 100% I'll become irrelevant if I'm only a writer, because there's a kind of writing I can do that was very cool in 2015, 2016, 2017, 2018. But will that kind of writing work today? I'm not very sure. Like, so it's like it's more of a strategic call in terms of like me not getting any younger. I have like different priorities in life, right? I have a kid, so I have different priorities in life, and I'm not sacrificing anything for. It's not something that I quit everything and I've taken up like a corporate job or something like that, right? So I'm still creating. I feel I'm still creating work. I'm still creating value. I'm still creating things that I want to create.
Right.
Um, and I think that's completely fine. And also, like I told you, I look at wealth as more of an enabler for me in the future than something that's going to put an end to the things that I want to do. So I want to get there hopefully sooner.
A lot of insightful stuff on this podcast. Thank you so much for giving me your time. I know it's super valuable, but काफी time हो गया and I didn't realize how long this podcast has been, but thank you so much.
Not at all, not at all, Ayush. Thank you so much. I mean, it was just like fun, man. Like good catching up.